Chapter 28. It took us another 7 hours or so to get the rest of the store cleaned up and in working order. While we swept up broken glass, scrubbed the floors, and righted shelving units, I used the blanket fort interface to see what we had, what was worth keeping, and what needed to be cut to make room for additional provisions. Overall, I was thrilled. The former mediocre mart had been less Walgreens and more the bastard Levecchild of a Walgreens and a Dollar General, with a little dash of local hardware store sprinkled into the mix. There was a great selection of items ranging from home decor and housewares to grocery and automotive. 28 aisles in total, meticulously laid out with all the basics anyone could ever need for survival. There were a few aisles that needed to be gutted, but far fewer than I'd originally anticipated. I was pleased to see that the grocery section had a surprisingly well-rounded selection of food. Boxes of cereal, pasta noodles and marinara sauce, soup and canned veggies, cup of noodles, and shelves full of bread. The frozen section was also loaded down with a variety of TV dinners, frozen pizzas, cheap sliders, and boneless chicken wings. Plus, a whole freezer, near to bursting with ice cream. There were also chips and snack food aplenty that would stay good for a geological epoch, even if none of it was healthy exactly. The store had flats of bottled water, cases of soda, and a whole lot dedicated to cheap liquor. The booze would make the time here a little more bearable, and it would probably also sell for as much or more than the elixirs back in the pharmacy. Same thing with the cigarettes, cheap cigars, and chew, stashed away by the register. During my 2 deployments, luxury items like cigarettes ended up being worth their weight in gold as people ran dry and nicotine cravings started kicking in. All of it stayed, of course, along with the exceedingly well-stocked over-the-counter drug section and other obvious essentials like basic hygiene, hardware, and home decor. All of the greeting cards in aisle 4 needed to go, since I couldn't imagine there would be much need for an abundance of get well soon or happy birthday cards. The toy and game aisle ended up on the chopping block as well, along with the vast majority of the beauty supplies. Like the cards, I highly doubted anyone would be in the market for tinted moisturizer, liquid foundation, or bottles of cheap perfume that smelled like old gym socks. Still, I tossed all of that stuff into my storage space. Waste not, want not, as my granddad used to say. There was a large storage area in the back, positioned behind the refrigerated section, but it was almost entirely devoid of items. Just a large open space with a concrete floor, a notice board, and a row of small metal lockers for employees to store whatever meager belongings they brought with them to shift. Normally, that was where all the items waiting to go to the floor would be kept, but we didn't have delivery trucks full of stuff waiting to be offloaded, which made it the perfect spot to set up temporary sleeping quarters. Eventually, I'd get some simple camping cots in here, but for now, I had Baby Hands and Pony Puff give the place a good sweep and scrub, then set up a series of sleeping pallets on the floor, using blankets and pillows from the home decor aisle. It wasn't exactly a 5-star resort and there was little to no privacy, but for delvers desperate for a safe place to catch a bit of shut-eye, it would do just fine. Cleaning up from the fight against the pharmacist and getting the store organized was only half the battle, though. I also needed to go through and price each and every one of the items on offer. Croc found a labeled gun stashed away in the employee lounge by the pharmacy, which made the process a bit easier, but it was still slow and tedious work. Thanks to my visit to the loot arcade, I already had a rough idea of what the going market rate was for most of this junk. I marked food and beverages at a single copper loot token apiece, while things like first aid kits, personal hygiene items, medicine, or survival gear such as blankets and flashlights went for more. Anywhere from 2 coppers all the way up to 1 silver. I based it off of how much money each item would cost to regenerate. Even though I felt the prices were a tad high, they were actually on par or even slightly lower than what someone would pay to purchase a comparable item from the loot arcades, plus I had a significantly wider variety of options. And no monstrous Pac-Man creatures to contend against. The convenience alone was worth the price to play, as far as I was concerned. Even though I probably could have squeezed a little more money out of each item, undercutting the only other supplier made my products much more attractive, and it didn't really matter to me, since, essentially, I had no overhead. With a little investment of mana, all of these products would regenerate. I could sell the same thing, over and over and over again, maximizing my profit through sheer volume. The adrenaline of the battle against the Harmesis had finally faded from my system, which is when I realized exactly how wiped I was. I fell asleep while sweeping up some broken glass near the vitamin section in aisle 26 and woke up several hours later on one of the makeshift sleeping mats in the storage room. I wasn't 100% sure how I'd ended up on the pallet, but I suspected Croc had something to do with that. The dog was sitting beside me, staring at me with feverish intensity. "Good morning, Dan," the mimic said. I glowered at the dog. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked, sitting up then leaning back on my palms. "Just watching you sleep and not thinking about eating you or how succulent your meat would be." I recoiled. "Why would you even say that?" I asked, brow furrowing in skepticism. "You've gotta know how insanely suspicious that sounds, right? It definitely makes me think you were considering whether to eat me or not." "What? No. I would never, Dan," Croc protested. "Friends don't kill, eat, or dismember each other. We've already gone over this. Even though, objectively speaking, you probably would be delicious. Not that I want to eat you, of course." I cleared my throat and scooted back a wee bit. "Of course," I replied with a weak smile, before politely excusing myself to the bathroom. Just when I thought I'd finally gotten used to how weird Croc was, the mimic went and did or said something that made me question all of my life choices. At least, inside the safety and protection of the store, I wouldn't have to worry. If Croc ever did lose control and try to make a meal out of me, Stasis Halo would lock the mimic down faster than a boot marine buying a used Dodge Charger at a 21% interest rate. There were 2 gendered bathrooms, each with several stalls, but there was also a smaller, private bathroom attached to the employees' break room. That bathroom would serve as my private commode. There wasn't a shower, unfortunately, so instead I took a quick baby wipe wash, scrubbing away days of blood, sweat, and grime, then brushed my teeth and applied a fresh coat of deodorant, which helped combat the eye-watering stench of bow wafting from beneath my armpits. I'd need to be on the lookout for proper bathing facilities. Attaching some sort of laundromat probably wouldn't go amiss either. The employees' break room was rather lackluster and unimpressive. It had a small, time-worn love seat and a round table with a few metal folding chairs, but it also came with a small kitchenette complete with sink, fridge, stove, and microwave, as well as the most important item of all time: a coffee pot. There was plenty of coffee over in the grocery aisle, so I wouldn't have to worry about running out anytime soon, and there were extra coffee pots for sale in the housewares section. Croc slinked into the room as I puttered around the break room, nuking a frozen burrito from the coolers and putting on a pot of coffee to brew. "Listen, I just wanted to apologize for what I said back there," the mimic offered. "About eating you and all that. For the record, I would not eat you, but as we discussed yesterday, friends don't lie." The mimic took a deep, steadying breath. "And though it pains me to admit it, it would be a lie to say I've never considered eating you. I love helping Delvers, but it's also in my nature to eat Delvers. But I would never do it. I'm basically the mimic version of a vegetarian. Do I have the capacity to eat you? Yes. Do I have the ravenous desire to eat you? Also yes. But I've taken the moral high ground and elected not to eat humans. Except for bad ones," it amended after a second. "Or ones that are already dead, I suppose." Croc seemed to brighten as an idea occurred to it. "You know what? You and I are just like Edward and Bella from the internationally best-selling and beloved by all Twilight series, written by the unparalleled wordsmith Stevie Meyer, starring the expressive Kristen Stewart as Bella, and the eminently talented Robert Pattinson as the dreamy, yet mysterious Edward. Our love and friendship cut against the very fabric of nature, yet, somehow, we make it work with absolutely no negative repercussions whatsoever. Plus, I like to watch you sleep, just like Edward. The parallels are truly uncanny. Are you being sarcastic right now?" I asked. Because I genuinely don't know whether you're being sarcastic or if you legitimately love the Twilight series. Of course I'm being serious. I mean, what's not to love? Romance. Drama. Action scenes and cool powers. An apex predator befriending a squishy, irresistibly delicious meat-filled human then subsequently wrestling with their insatiable desire for murder? Croc nodded enthusiastically. It's very relatable content, Dan. I can't decide which part of that statement was the most concerning. But I feel the need to point out that Edward does eventually eat Bella. Wait, does that mean you're a fan of the series, too? Croc interpreted excitedly. I was half tempted to deny it, but then recalled the dog's brutal and uncomfortable honesty. Friends don't lie to each other. I read it on deployment, okay? And it was fine. Not great. But fine. If you're into that sort of thing. Which I'm not. Here's the real takeaway, Croc. Please, for the love of my sanity and all that is good in the world, never, ever, under any circumstance, for any reason whatsoever, compare you and me to Bella and Edward again. Ever. For any reason. Are we clear? Crystal. Croc shook one eye at me, and the pupil jiggled. I can't blink, it said, but that's what I was trying to do there, just so you know. There is one other tiny little point of awkwardness I was hoping to talk to you about. Croc paused and took one fearful look over one shoulder. I'm not quite sure how to say this, but it's about. The mimic dropped its voice to a whisper. Princess Pony Puff. The golem with the pony head, it added for clarity, as though I'd somehow be able to forget the terrifying pony Voltron, destroyer of worlds. Don't get me wrong, Croc continued. I'm not saying that she has overtly created a hostile work environment, but there's definitely something not quite right about that one. Baby Hans is great. He and I are like two peas in a pod. He's a great listener, too, but Pony Puff just keeps staring at me with cold, unblinking murder eyes, Croc said while simultaneously staring at me with cold, unblinking plastic eyes. And she's constantly saying odd things about meat, or the failings of mortal flesh, or how the power of friendship shall unlock the great pits of the eternal dark. Again, not anything overtly threatening or hostile, but there's just something that doesn't feel right about it, you know? She also follows me around. And I saw her surgically dissecting one of the few remaining Barbie dolls. Just little things like that. Gee, that sounds creepy, I replied flatly. Can't imagine what being on the receiving end of that would be like. Couldn't agree more. It's amazing how socially unaware some people can be. The point, Croc continued, somehow missing both my sarcasm and point entirely, is that I'd love to get out and stretch my legs a bit. Just, you know, get some distance and create some healthy boundaries. We've got all these new powers to try out, you need to go to a progenitor monolith, plus our artifact and relic supply could use a few upgrades before we have our grand opening. I in no way mean this as a criticism, but things are a little underwhelming in that department. I grunted and drummed my fingers on the edge of the cheap table. Croc wasn't wrong. I'd cleaned out the glass security cases behind the front register and replaced the high-end booze, tobacco products, and lotto scratch-offs for the handful of relics and artifacts I was willing to part with. Seeing it all laid out showcased exactly how thin our supplies really were at the moment. After crafting the two golems, all we had left was one gremlin jockstrap, 2 basic combo spells, and 9 of the Erlenmeyer's Molotov cocktail relics. The Molotov cocktails would probably fetch a decent price, but everything else was basically one step above garbage. I could change that, though, assuming we could get our hands on more relics. Since I could analyze the synergistic effects of relics using the Researcher's Codex, I could take trash tier loot and forge them into uncommon or even rare relics that people would kill to get their hands on. And anything else I could either trade away for better equipment or sacrifice to level up my own abilities. I'd put out a couple of the Power Pro Muscle Mind Extreme Pump pre-workout elixirs and the handful of artifacts I looted from the Roy Gremlins and the Mallrats. But the handful of artifacts I had on hand was as disappointing as my relic selection. There was the enchanted barbell bow staff, the jump rope flail, the jinxed fortune bracelet, and a few other miscellaneous items that had no overt power, but empty effect slots, a pair of crocheted mittens, a plastic ring with a giant fake flower, a left flip-flop, and a chipped coffee mug with a picture of a kitten hanging from a power line that read, "Just hang in there." I'd swapped the classy booze for lesser healing, mana, and stamina elixirs, which helped round out the display and was the biggest draw by far. Still, all things considered, it was rather lacking was a better word than pathetic, though pathetic was probably more accurate. Unlike Croc, though, I wasn't worried. "You're right that we need to expand our inventory," I said, "but you're thinking about how we'll do it all wrong. We aren't the party of D&D adventurers, and our job isn't to go out and raid dungeons. We're the distributor, Croc. Our real job is to advertise, and if we do that well, then other delvers will bring us everything we need and then some, and we won't have to lift a finger." Croc stared at me, rubbery mouth hanging agape. "Once again, I stand in awe of your wisdom, Dan. Truly, you are the defining intellect of a generation." I looked for a barb in the words, but as always, it seemed the mimic's compliment was genuine. "Just out of curiosity, though," the dog continued, "how exactly are we going to do that? The advertising and whatnot, I mean." "Don't worry, I've got a plan." I reached a hand through the void and pulled out a can of spray paint. I'd been pleasantly surprised to find there were cans of spray paint in the hardware section, which meant I wouldn't need to raid any more art supply shops in the immediate future. Then I drew out a second item, the red twinning yarn I'd purchased from the Loot Arcade. That wasn't endless, but I had more than enough to last me for a good long while. "Come on," I said, jamming the spray paint and yarn into the exterior pockets of my tool belt. Croc and I left the break room behind and beelined toward the front of the store. I gave a sharp whistle as we walked and called out for the two cannon fodder golems to meet me by the front. Princess Ponypuff was already loitering behind the counter, while Baby Hands lumbered in from aisle 2, his heavy footfalls reverberating off the ceiling tiles overhead. "All right, team meeting," I said. "Croc and I are going out to plant doorway anchors, acquire some new territory, and canvass the area with a viral guerrilla marketing campaign." "You didn't mention there would be gorillas involved, Dan," Croc blurted out. "Gorilla not gorilla," I corrected. Then to really drive the point home, just to be perfectly clear, if there are gorillas involved at any point in the process, things have gone wildly off the rails. Now, please stop derailing me. "Oh, I see what you did there," Croc chortled. "Off the rails and derailing me. Very clever, Dan. Very clever." "Damn it, Croc, please shut it," I growled, then made a zipping motion, running my fingers across my lips. "Croc and I will be out for a while, but if things go as planned, we should start to have a trickle of customers before too long." "Baby Hands, you're dumber than a sack of bricks." "Baby Hands is hard worker," the golem agreed, nodding its body. "Yep, which is why you're the muscle. If anyone tries looting or stealing anything, you stop them and throw their asses out with a polite but firm warning. I've already programmed a few basic rules into the Banhammer protocol, so if they deal more than 10% damage to you, the store will auto-eject them, and they won't be able to regain entry. There's also a door fee for all delvers who are over level 1. If they want to come in, even to browse, it'll cost them 1 copper loot token, doesn't matter the flavor. You got all that, Baby Hands?" "Baby Hands is Baby Hands," the golem grumbled. I assumed that was idiot for, "Yep, I got all that, boss." "Ponypuff," I turned my gaze on the demonic megazord of toys and evil, "you're in charge of the shop while we're out. Your main job is to interact with the customers and man the cash register. Any level 0 customer who wanders in automatically gets one of the basic Delver kits we put together free of charge, plus 1 complimentary night of sleep." "Quick question, Dan, but how are we going to earn relics if we give stuff away?" Croc asked, sounding befuddled but interested in learning. "I asked you not to derail me, but that is a fair question," I replied. "It's called a loss leader. If a Delver is level 0, it means they're brand new. Fresh meat, essentially. That also means they probably don't have anything worth trading. But if we give away one of those survival kits, it'll earn customer loyalty and it'll help them survive long enough to get better stuff, which they will then sell back to us. There's even a coupon in each of the kits for 10% off their first order, I added, which should help create repeat business. As for the customers who aren't level 0, they've gotta pay. The items on the shelves are all labeled already, so you'll just have to ring them out once they're done shopping. The prices for the few relics and artifacts we have are also posted. I waved at the wall of items, each with a paper sticker attached to the front, and those prices are non-negotiable. The pricing scheme was fair, though certainly in my favor. We were charging 15 copper tokens, or 15 common shards for a common relic or artifact, or I'd take a 2-for-1 trade-in on relics of the same rarity level. The uncommon relics and artifacts were obviously more expensive and ran 3 silver tokens, 1 gold token, or 15 uncommon shards apiece. I was also willing to take a 2-for-1 swap on those, or they could buy an uncommon for 5 common relics of any type. As for the health, mana, and stamina regen potions, those all ran either 4 coppers of any variety or 8 shards each, which was significantly below the going value at the loot arcade. Because the price was so damned good, I decided to cap those at 3 elixirs per customer. They would serve as another loss leader to get people through the door, and even though I was undercutting the arcade, I'd still be making a healthy profit, since the store would naturally regenerate those over time anyway. Let anyone that comes in know that we are also actively looking to buy any relics or artifacts they are willing to part with. I reached back into the void and pulled out a sack filled with copper delver loot tokens. There were 35 in there, leaving just 5 left in my personal inventory. We are paying out 7 coppers for common relics, 1 silver for uncommons. I retrieved a second, much smaller bag, and added it to the first. It contained 3 silvers, which felt physically painful to part with, the 2 silver delver tokens I'd earned from clearing the store and 1 silver weapon master token. Ponypuff accepted the 2 bags without comment and slipped them into the cash register drawer. "Any questions?" I asked, eyeing the 2 golems and wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. When neither asked, I grimaced and nodded. Probably a terrible mistake. "Is it time to go summon the gorillas?" Croc asked, sounding hopeful, tail waggling so hard the dog's rump was damn near vibrating. Again, and I cannot emphasize this strongly enough, there will absolutely be no gorillas involved, Croc. And to answer your actual question, almost. There's just one more little thing we need to do before we can really get this show on the road. I turned and eyed a spot right next to the front counter. A space that looked like it was custom built to hold an ATM, or maybe something ATM-shaped. Like a progenitor monolith. Chapter 29. As Croc and I exited the shop, I glanced back over one shoulder to find the familiar glass sliding door vanish in the span of 3 steps. One minute it was there, and the next it was like the entire store had been surgically cut out of existence, neatly removed like a cancerous tumor, leaving only a smooth expanse of tiled wall where the shop had been before. "Well, there's something you don't see every day," I muttered while examining the empty stretch of wall. Then I realized the same could be said for literally every single thing inside the back rooms. Giant mole rats the size of Rottweilers. Skinless demons. Firebomb-hurling crows. A dog with goggly eyes made entirely out of croc material. I shook my head, dismissing the thought, and activated an unerring arrow, fixing the nearest monolith in mind. My plan was to head up to the lobby and start my guerrilla marketing campaign there, grinding out some easy experience against the lobby greeters, then progressively work my way down. But first I needed to divvy out my 15 available personal enhancement points. No reason to sit on them. Plus, there was something I wanted to try. The arrow ushered us back the way we'd come, down a few wide hallways, then through a service corridor that had a handful of easily avoidable low-level traps and a single level 2 monomorphic flytrap mimic, in the form of a metal folding chair. I scorched the dweller with a quick 1-2 punch of bleach blazes, then looted its smoldering corpse, earning another basic camouflage relic in the process. Like all the others I'd visited so far, The monolith was outside of a small bank, this one called Sunset Savings and Loan. I glanced through the frosted white window trying to get a better idea of what exactly was inside the bank and what connection they had to the progenitor monoliths. Were all the monoliths, even those located on other floors, also outside of community banks? I didn't have an answer, but at this point, I was certain it was more than just a coincidence. I asked Croc while still peering through the window, though I couldn't see jack shit inside. The glass was so opaque that I'd need to venture inside if I wanted any sort of answer, and I wasn't that curious. Not yet, anyway. It's not always a bank, Croc replied absently. It's only a bank here on the 3rd floor. I've never been lower than floor 11, myself, but on floor 1 you can find them outside of these parking attendant shacks. On floor 2, they are all located by the plumbers and steam fitters union shops. I've spent a fair bit of time down on floor 7, as well, since that's where Howler's hold is. The monoliths on 7 are always near a principal's office. Does that mean level 7 is a school? I asked, wanting to know more about the level with the safe harbor. Croc frowned. More or less. Most of it is school-themed, but there are some school-adjacent areas, too. Outdoor playgrounds. Cafeterias. Nurse stations. Nurseries. Those weird birthday party places that cater exclusively to children between the ages of 7 and 11. Those are usually the loot arcades, though. Any idea what's inside here? I asked, stepping away from the community bank then hooking a thumb toward the frosted glass. Bad stuff is what, Croc said darkly. Delvers that go into the banks don't come back out. Ever. Against my better judgment, I went into one with a delver from Brazil named Juana. It looked like what you would expect from a small bank. Blank carpet, comfortable chairs, racks of literature about different types of savings accounts and credit cards. But there was a guardian inside. He was called a vault teller. He was very tall, the vault teller. Maybe 8 or 9 feet, I reckon, and he wore a nice suit. Instead of a face, he had on this ivory white porcelain mask with a big smile. It seemed, Croc hesitated for a second, as though considering its words carefully, not as overtly hostile as most of the store managers. The dog finished. But when Juana got too close, he pulled that mask off. He didn't have a face, Dan. Where it should have been was just this empty black hole. That hole sucked Juana right in like a vacuum cleaner. Compressed her into a pulverized ball of meat and bone the size of my fist, then just swallowed her. That didn't sound especially hopeful. Any idea what level the vault teller was? I asked, my curiosity growing even stronger. Level 40, Dan. For reference, that's a full 13 levels higher than the murder muncher from the arcade. The thing that was so strong you couldn't even have scratched it on your best day, even with that fancy stolen emblem of yours. I say all that, just in case you were thinking of doing something rash. I sighed and moved away from the bank. Nope, I replied, shaking my head. It just strikes me as odd is all. This place, I waved a hand around, it feels wild and chaotic and random, but it's not. Not always. You said there are loot arcades and progenitor monoliths in every quadrant. That's a pattern. But that also means there's one of these banks, or something like it, in every quadrant, too. And assuming they all have these powerful guardians, the question becomes, just what in the hell are they guarding? I let the question hang, unanswered, in the air as I headed over to the monolith and quickly toggled through the options menu, pulling up my specimen bio report. I scanned through the details but didn't linger long on anything in particular. I had 15 enhancement points to burn, and I had a good idea of what to do with them. Although I still badly wanted to enhance my athleticism and toughness so that I could take a hit and pummel things to death with my hammer, my magic was just a more effective tool. It did more damage and was far more versatile than any of my purely physical skills, plus the mana capacitor gave me percentage-based boosts, so the higher base stat the greater the overall benefit. With that in mind, I dropped 2 points into perception and 8 points into resonance, both of which influenced my overall mana pool and regeneration rate. I added a single point to toughness. Thanks to my shitty health pool, I'd already knocked out death's door one too many times for my liking, and intended to change that, even if it took a little longer than I wanted. I begrudgingly dropped the last 4 enhancement points into grit, because I was also getting real tired of things screwing around inside my head. First those Shathiels in the Blacklight Emporium, then the hypnotic chomping of the murder muncher in the arcade, and finally the photophage. My low grit score had nearly killed me several times over, and I needed to rectify that before it ended up burying me for good. Dan Woodridge. Specimen Biotag ID number 038-01-B00R7T569C. Variant Assimilation Level, 12. Race, Human, Archetypal. Current Experience, 10,990. Next Level, 12,250. Personal Enhancement Points, 0. ____________. Health, 43. Health Regen Hour, 2. ____________. Stamina Reserve, 25. Stamina Regen Minute, 1.95. ___________. Mana Pool, 77. Mana Regen Minute, 6. Individual Adaptive Stats. Grit, 10. 9 + 1 Enhanced Athleticism, 8. Toughness, 9. Perception, 15. Resonance, 30. Preservation, 5. Spatial Core, Active. C. Tinfoil Hat of Mind Shielding, Level 1. C. The Gremlin's Growing Guardian, Level 1. C. Force Multiplier, Level 1. C. Slippery When Wet, Level 1. U. Mall Ninja's Strike, Level 1. U. Bad Trip, Level 1. R. Sterilization Field, Level 1. R. Bleach Blaze, the Unidentified Stain Eradicator, Level 2. Me. Compass of the Catacomber Fully Tempered. Current Titles, Passive. Out of Your League, Death Wish, Marked for Death, Weapon of Opportunity, Legend in the Making, Overkill Overlord. Happy with my handiwork, I closed out of the SBR, then took a step away from the monolith as I brought up and expanded my minimap until it took up the majority of my vision. I wanted to try something, though I wasn't sure it would work, since I had a sneaking suspicion that the monolith was in some way tethered to the nearby bank. But when I scrutinized the map, the monolith itself wasn't marked in red. With a thought and a whisper of will, I activated Blanket Fort for the second time, this time tracing an ethereal line in a tight square, which only encompassed the monolith itself. As the ends of the Blue Manta Trail connected, the world seemed to groan around me and shift almost imperceptibly beneath my feet. There was a resistance that hadn't been present when liberating the mediocre mart, almost as if I were prying out a stubborn tooth. For a long beat, I thought the ability would fail me, but then the familiar prompt appeared again, traced into the in 8-bit glory. Corvo's Blanket Fort. You've selected 3 square feet of eligible pro-generated material resource space. Would you like to use Corvo's Blanket Fort to graft the selected material onto a personal superspace dwelling? Proceed yes no? I stared at the prompt in slack-jawed amazement. Well, how about that? I was stone certain this wouldn't work, but if I could actually add a monolith to the store, it would be a game-changer, especially for the fresh meat trickling in from the lobby. Instead of having to hunt around for a monolith, they'd be able to stop in, integrate with the virus, then head right back out into the fray, fully equipped with stats, survival gear, and even relics. Assuming they could pay my prices, of course. I was happy to offer them basic survival kits, free of charge, but relics were too rare and valuable to give away as handouts. As I selected yes, the world groaned again and the ground rumbled. A moment later there was an intense flash of light and a thunderous snap that sounded like breaking glass and grinding stone. I stumbled back and blinked several times to clear my vision. When I could see again, the monolith was, indeed, gone, and where it had been standing was a blank, smooth patch of tile. Something else had changed as well, however. A huge crack had appeared across the frosted white window of the Sunset Savings and Loan, then continued down, morphing into a deep fissure that carved its way across the stone facade of the bank. The jagged crack, large enough to stick my entire hand into, terminated at the floor. I dropped into a crouch and ran my fingers along the edges of the fracture. The stone felt slick and also strangely warm, though not hot. I pulled my fingers away and found them coated in a thick, mucus-like goo. The fuck is going on here? Although sequestering the mediocre mart had caused some minor tremors, I got the sense that I'd just damaged the backrooms in a rather significant way. I vividly recalled how much force it had taken to put a tiny hairline crack in the arcade window. I was sure the backrooms would heal the damage over time, but I couldn't even imagine the amount of metaphysical power it would take to inflict this kind of wound in the first place. I stood and shook the slime free from my fingers, then wiped my palm against the outer edge of the Versace bathrobe for good measure. "Dan, what in the world did you just do?" Croc asked, sounding equally impressed and scandalized. "I think I just got us our own personal progenitor monolith." "But that's..." Croc started to say. "But that's not possible. The monoliths are an integral part of each quadrant, just like the arcades. You can't just take one," the dog finished. "Then, can you? I mean, will it even work if it's disconnected from the rest of the backrooms?" "Only one way to find out," I replied with a shrug. I reached through the void and pulled out one of the 6 doorway anchors I'd received after establishing my blanket fort for the first time. I half expected it to look like an arcane sigil or maybe a golden skeleton key engraved with runes of tremendous power. It was neither of those things. It looked like a black plastic door plate with a simple white rectangular border. Written on the front of the placard were the words "Discount Dan's Backroom Bargains." There was an option to edit the text, but I left it as it was. I was trying to advertise, after all. Intuitively, I fed a trickle of mana into the item, then moved over to the bank in 4 long strides and slapped it against the glass door. It hit with a sharp thwack and a new prompt appeared. "You've attached a standard doorway anchor to a compatible door at the current relative position, March 28, 2016. 52-67. Completing this action will convert the existing doorway into an entrance to Discount Dan's Backroom Bargains. Warning, unlike VIP doorway anchors, which can be reclaimed at any time, once a standard doorway anchor is placed, it cannot be reclaimed for 24 hours. Proceed? Yes, no? I faltered when I got to the part that spelled out the difference between the VIP and the standard doorway anchors. I'd been wondering about that since the items had magically appeared in my inventory, but I hadn't been able to find anything about them in the operations manual. Now, I knew. The fact that I could only reclaim the standard anchors once a day limited some of the various ways that I could use them, but the VIP anchor mostly made up for any other shortcomings. With the VIP anchor, I'd be able to pop in and out of my personal superspace without ever having to worry about backtracking to find a doorway. I accepted the prompt, and a flare of metaphysical weight briefly pressed against my newly enhanced perception. It almost reminded me of the spiritual pressure I'd felt while under the cold gaze of the flayed monarch. The skinless ruler had forced me to the ground and ruptured several of my organs just through the sheer power of its presence. That was mana control, I was beginning to realize. Mana itself had a certain weight to it, and the more a person had, or the more a spell consumed, the heavier that weight became. Based on the pressure building in the air around me, whatever I'd just done was very heavy, spiritually speaking. Another prompt appeared as the weight lifted, then faded entirely. You've created a prime doorway anchor point, securely tethering your personal superspace dwelling to the VES variant exploration surveyorship superstructure. If you remove this prime anchor point without first attaching a secondary anchor point, it is statistically probable that your superspace dwelling will become unmoored from reality and drift into the oblivion field within 1 standard year, where it will suffer utter, unfathomable annihilation. Due to the nature of your personal superspace dwelling, all doorway anchors act as a temporal restriction field, which allows you, the owner, to set up an admittance credentialing system to limit access based on criteria of your choosing. Would you like to set up an admittance credentialing system at this time? Failure to do so will allow any delver or dweller to enter your PSD through all active doorway anchor points. Yes, no? The operations manual hadn't mentioned the difference between the VIP and standard anchors, but it had briefly covered the credentialing system, though it had been rather light on the details. Probably because the doorway anchors themselves had their own custom interface, just the same way as the store did. Although I was jonesing to start spreading the word about my new general store, I couldn't just let any random schlub waltz on into my store. I had a skinless murder god hunting me, after all, not to mention all of his cultist shithead pals. I hit yes and a new interface appeared, this one just as complicated as my personal SBR portal and my blanket fort interface. But it was also intuitive and surprisingly easy to use. There were several demographic tabs that allowed me to discriminate against damn near anyone for damn near any reason. I could deny access based on gender, age, variant assimilation level, faction affiliation, and about 100 other things, including a delver's former occupation or medical conditions, ranging from the flu to gonorrhea. Obviously, I wasn't going to keep someone out because of a case of the sniffles. I had enough coffee syrup to drown an ox, but that also meant I could prevent anyone with early onset blight from getting inside and contaminating my property. I quickly toggled through the options and kept it general to start, excluding anyone with the blight or any affiliation with the skinless court. I also set the variant assimilation level cap at 30 for the time being. I could always adjust that as I got stronger, but for now I wanted to play it safe. Although the store had a metricus load of formidable defensive capabilities, I had no idea how powerful someone above level 30 really was or what kind of artifacts and relics they might have at their disposal. While camouflaged, mimics could render themselves invisible even to my mapmaker's eye, which was a fully tempered, fabled grade relic that also happened to be part of a mythic grade emblem. If a low-level combo spell could do all that, then maybe there were more powerful relics that would actively suppress the store's stasis halo or banhammer bindings, preventing them from engaging. Was I being paranoid? Probably. But just because I was paranoid didn't mean I was wrong. Once all the demographic restrictions were in place, the system prompted me to create an intro message and a set of group rules, which would be shown to every single person, human or otherwise, the moment they attempted to enter through any doorway anchor for the first time. I only mulled it over for a short moment, before crafting my magnificent masterpiece. Welcome to Discount Dan's Backroom Bargains. Need supplies, food, artifacts, relics, or just a safe place to lay your head for a few hours? You've come to the right place. We've got a little bit of everything and offer all of it for a fair price. But, and read this part carefully, if you fuck around with me, my employees, or my store, I guarantee you will find out. As my granddad would say, sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. This is a neutral space, so whatever problems you have with other delvers or dwellers, that shit stays outside my store. Follow the rules and you'll be fine. Don't and you're gonna regret it. Don't steal, or I'll dropkick your ass into the sun. Don't harass store employees. Seriously. They will end you. Don't damage store property or I will personally feed you to the mobile murder muncher in the loot arcade. Don't be a dick. You might be surprised how far not being a dick will take you in life. Discount Dan's is neutral territory. All are welcome here, except for the aspirants of the skinless court. All aspirants of the skinless court can go suck an entire bag of dicks. Discount Dan. I read then reread my message, double-checking that I hadn't missed anything important. Admittedly, it wasn't the most professional welcome message, but it got the point across and covered all the major bases. Plus, if I thought of anything else, I could always add it in later. Satisfied, I approved the rules, then tugged the door open without ceremony and stepped not into what should have been the inside of Sunset Savings and Loan, but into my own little slice of paradise. Princess Ponypuff was manning the front desk, looking rather bored, and though there was no sign of baby hands, I could hear shuffling footsteps off in the distance accompanied by the squelching sound of a mop. That guy really did have one hell of a work ethic. Sitting nearby, jutting off from the wall in its own little alcove, was the progenitor monolith I'd just added. I hurriedly flipped open my operations manual, accessed the blanket Ford interface, and selected the new edition. A ghostly 3D version of the store blazed to life in the air, and I rotated the layout with a quick twist of my fingers so I had a perfect top-down view of the entire store, including the poorly tacked-on new edition. I selected the monolith with a poke of my finger and the item lit up white on the holographic overlay. Using the map, I dragged the machine away from its secluded nook and repositioned it near the front desk, right where an ATM should have sat, but didn't. There was a low groan and a subsequent tremor shivered through the floor, but by the time I closed the 3-ring binder, the new alcove was gone, and the monolith had already been relocated to its new position beside checkout. The real question now, though, was would the monolith actually work? Holding my breath in anticipation, I slapped my palm against the reader. The options menu appeared, and a grin spread across my face. I selected my SBR tab, just to be sure, but everything appeared to be working without a hitch. That left a new question spinning through my head. If I could steal a monolith, what about a loot arcade? If I could tack one of those sons of bitches onto the store, it could prove mighty useful. Then I faltered. Sure, it would be personally convenient to have access to a private loot arcade, but would I be hurting my overall bottom line in the process? Thing was, there was no way for me to take a cut on any of the items within the loot arcade. The backrooms absorbed all loot tokens spent, which meant delvers would come in and spend money on stuff that didn't belong to me. I'd have to noodle on that one a little and figure out what the best course of action was. But first things first, I needed to start getting the word out. Well? Croc asked, shaking me from my thoughts. Does it still work? My grin widened into a beaming smile and I nodded. We're in business, my friend. And now it's time to go let everyone know. Chapter 30. With the first doorway anchor planted, Croc and I headed back up to the lobby to start our viral marketing campaign. Locating a stairwell took less than half an hour thanks to an unerring arrow, and in short order we found ourselves wandering through endlessly confusing corridors filled with gray carpet, white columns, buzzing lights, and moldy yellow wallpaper. We emerged in a quadrant that was 100 miles or more away from where I'd first entered the backrooms, which gave me some sense of exactly how big this place really was. Each level was easily the size of a sprawling city, according to Croc. Some were even the size of small countries, and I couldn't afford to post more than one doorway per level. Hell, even if I only planted one on every other level, I'd still need to hit level 500 before I could cover just half of the known levels in this twisted hellhole. I would be able to move the doors, though, which would likely help in the long run. In the short term, it created a significant logistical problem. Although I could mark up the walls with spray paint, leaving clues, hints, and even rudimentary directions, the sheer scope of the lobby was just too massive for that to be an effective long-term strategy. Especially since the floors were liable to shift at sporadic intervals. A phenomenon I personally experienced for the first time after about 2 hours in the lobby. Croc and I were making our way down an unremarkable hallway, identical to 1,000 others just like it, when suddenly the whole world rumbled as a massive earthquake knocked me on my ass. Motes of dust rained down from the ceiling, hanging thick in the air, and the lights flickered madly, casting the hallway into darkness for a few long, tense seconds before finally stabilizing. Several long cracks had appeared in the walls, though it would only be a matter of time before the wounds healed themselves. Once the dust settled, it was damn near impossible to tell that anything had even happened. If it weren't for my handy-dandy menu map I would have written it off as an errant tremor. Just another weird thing in a very weird place. My map lent me some much-needed perspective, however. Although the individual sector I was in hadn't changed at all, that sector itself had moved its relative location within its quadrant, and the quadrant, in turn, had radically shifted its position within the floor. The menu map had a useful feature, which allowed me to get an accurate current relative position coordinate at any given moment. Just minutes before the shift, my CRP had been 0.15.23.19-78, which corresponded to Floor 0, Quadrant 15, Sector 23. After the floor shift, My CRP had changed drastically to 0.31.12.19-78. Floor 0, Quadrant 31, Sector 12. The sudden change reinforced my logistical challenge. Given everything working against me, just how in the hell was I supposed to guide a brand new delver, who didn't know their ass from their elbow, to a singular doorway in a sprawling labyrinth that was as big as the city of LA? Only 1,000 times more confusing. With monsters. And no food or water. Plus, the floors shifted, completely rearranging their entire spatial layout at seemingly random intervals. The answer turned out to be simple and surprisingly elegant: the red yarn I'd received from the loot arcade. The twinning string. The string wasn't nearly as good as unerring arrow, but it served a similar function. Although the two small sections of string weren't physically connected, they were metaphysically connected through a spectral tether of power. With a simple effort of intention, an intrepid delver could easily use one piece of string to find its twin, no matter how far apart it might be. Even better, because the yarn was an artifact, it didn't require mana to use, which meant even noobs without a relic could harness its magic. It was the perfect solution. I stashed hundreds of little slivers of yarn inside the cash register drawer back in the store. Then I took the twinned pieces, tied each of them into small red rings that could be worn around a finger, and spent the better part of 3 days systematically distributing them throughout the lobby. Well, a relatively small section of it, anyway. Every time there was a trap or an environmental danger, I'd take a few minutes to spray paint a warning in bright red letters. Rule number 1. Beware the bathrooms, the toilets will eat you. This survival tip brought to you by Discount Dan's Backroom Bargains. Once that was done, I'd pound a nail into the wall with practiced ease, tim away it with a sliver of mana using the Surveyor's Mark ability, then loop several of the yarn rings around the nail head. That done, I'd mark the location on my mini-map, then beneath each nail, I'd write a much smaller note using my Sharpie. Bad news. You're in the back rooms. Worse news, everything is trying to kill you. Better news, I'm not trying to kill you. Take one of the yarn rings, put it on your finger, and follow where it takes you. Or don't and die, the choice is yours. I've got supplies, intel, and a progenitor monolith waiting. Discount Dan. It was a truly tedious process, and because the lobby was so enormous, Croc and I were only able to loosely canvas 2 of the 36 quadrants. And that was with 3 days of constant grinding, trekking for 15 hours or more a day, and only taking short breaks to eat or catch a few minutes of shut-eye. By the end of the 3rd day, I was starting to get a little discouraged. This place was just so impossibly vast that our meager efforts felt like a waste of time. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a coffee mug. But if we managed to save one life, it would be worth it. At least, that's what Croc told me over and over again any time it seemed like I was getting depressed. There weren't nearly as many traps in the lobby as there were on the 3rd floor. The greatest danger was desolate emptiness and the staggering lack of resources. Most of the unfortunate souls who ended up here would probably die from some combination of dehydration or starvation long before they stepped on a runic pressure plate or accidentally sat down on an aggressive flight rep mimic masquerading as a bench. That didn't mean there weren't any traps or threats, however. The walls themselves were slightly acidic, and there were rooms where the incessant buzzing of the fluorescent lights was so loud and disorienting it could make your ears literally bleed. Stay in there too long, Croc warned, and your organs would spontaneously liquefy, which was an absolutely horrifying notion. Needless to say, we marked the rooms quickly and didn't linger. I also found one isolated room that wasn't empty like all the others. It resembled a nondescript lobby, the kind of place that was common at cheap business hotels. There was nothing particularly impressive about it, but after wandering through a desert of carpet, it felt like stumbling into a lush oasis. There were padded armchairs, coffee tables, an empty reception desk, and even a working drinking fountain. The desk had phones that played banal please hold music on an endless loop and an ancient desktop computer that had been cutting edge back in 1993. Beside the desk was a wire rack filled with travel brochures. Like the lobby corridors, each and every brochure was identical. They all had "Welcome to the Backrooms" scrawled across the front, but the interior was filled with monotonous pictures of carpet, columns, and, of course, yellow wallpaper. There was ad copy and customer reviews splashed across each page of the trifold pamphlet, extolling the virtues of the backrooms as though it were a tourist destination filled with wondrous attractions and not a stinking death hole boiling over with murder monsters. Get lost in the ambience, and just about everything else. One headline read, "It's so awesome here, you'll never want to leave." Which is good, because you can't. Ha 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 ha, my eyes are bleeding. Another said. A customer review at the bottom of one page was especially poignant. Did I want to come here? No. Would I wish this on my worst enemy? Also no. This place is an infinite loop of existential dread. I want to die. Matt Smith, former guest of the Backrooms. Still, all of that aside, the room was far more inviting than any other space in the lobby, which obviously meant it was not to be trusted. In general, the lobby was sweltering, but the lounge hummed with AC. Delicious, cool, inviting, refreshing AC, which was perhaps the single greatest technological innovation of modern man. Unfortunately, the cool air also carried a faint chemical whiff, which was noticeable at first but faded quickly. Turned out, that chemical smell was a slow-acting anesthetic gas that would knock out anyone who loitered in the cushy lounge for too long. I started to feel a little woozy after 10 minutes or so. For those with lower athleticism and toughness stats, it probably would have been much quicker. The fact that this place would taint something as pure and amazing as AC was a genuine travesty and one of the deepest betrayals yet. When the gas eventually kicked in, there was something nasty waiting beneath the reception desk. Well, maybe not waiting beneath the reception desk, so much as it was part of the reception desk. My spelunker's sixth sense tipped me off right away, and I splattered the creature with a bleach blaze that ate through 90% of its HP on impact. Dweller 0.014A, Lobby Receptionist Level 4. The receptionist unfolded its body with a furious shriek as my attack landed. A tight black suit clung to limbs that were thin and frail-looking, and its head turned out to be the ancient computer from the desk. No surprise there. In many ways, it reminded me of the bathroom janitor who'd guarded the stairwell down to level 3. The creature hurtled over what remained of the desk in a mad rush to murder me even as ghostly blue flames ate through its suit and the pale skin beneath. I could have ended the monster with a second bleach blaze, but instead I drove my enchanted hammer into the side of its computer skull, activating the gavel of get fucked as the blow landed. Since the receptionist was well below 10% total health, the strike triggered the killing blow effect, slaying the target on contact. My hammer hit like a bomb blast and the ancient computer that served as the receptionist's head exploded, bits of bone, blood, plastic, and screen flying everywhere before the creature's knees gave out and it collapsed to the ground in a heap. There was a small bronze key on its corpse, which opened a secret panel in the wall behind the receptionist's desk. The door led out into a narrow stairwell that connected to level 1. The creature granted me 150 experience points and had a common relic, called Complementary Upgrade, along with 2 common shards tucked away inside its spatial core. Complementary Upgrade was a decent support spell that could be cast on a single target, increasing all damage that target dealt by 5% for 30 seconds. Unfortunately, the spell had a relatively high mana cost and couldn't be cast on self, which limited its usefulness. Especially since it was just me and Croc at this point. Still, something like that would sell well, so I added it to my inventory along with the tiny bronze key. Then I made sure to spray paint the room with so much red that it looked like a murder scene. Although the current Delver Guardian was dead, another would take its place sooner or later. On top of dehydration and starvation, exhaustion was also a significant problem, since resting for too long invariably summoned the lobby greeters. There was no exact science to how long was too long, however. It all seemed to boil down to one thing: how much time you'd spent in the lobby. Although there were a lot of greeters, they weren't everywhere, all the time, as I'd first assumed. The gangly nightmares traveled in packs, which typically ranged in size between 5 and 13 greeters. Once a pack found you, they started hunting in earnest, and once they got a whiff, they didn't relent until you were dead or had somehow managed to escape to a lower level. The greeters were rather timid, though. Opportunists and scavengers. Each one had a comically small health pool, and they only dealt a tiny amount of overall physical damage. They made up for their myriad of shortcomings with volume and patience. Once a target was weak, they would swarm en masse like a school of hungry piranha. And although they were weak and squishy, they were persistent little butt munchers who just wouldn't give up. They could wait for hours or days, biding their time until their chosen prey became so tired and dehydrated that they couldn't offer any meaningful resistance. Now that I'd hit level 12, the ghoulish greeters, with their inky skin, bulbous eyes, and two wide smiles, were far creepier than they were dangerous. Croc and I purposely took long rests, luring the creatures into range, then slaughtered them by the dozen before moving on. They offered only a paltry 25 experience points apiece, and despite being level 2, none of them carried relics, just common shards. But, again, volume. There were a shit ton of them and they didn't seem especially bright because more and more kept coming at me, even though I was leaving actual piles of corpses in my wake. Enough corpses that even Croc got full. I massacred so many of the gangly, pot-bellied bastards that I leapt right past level 13 and hit level 14 by the third day of grinding. I'd earned 2,575 experience, in total, plus 111 common relic shards. I'd also unlocked a new achievement, which I had mixed feelings about. Research achievement unlocked. Fish in a barrel. You're one sick fuck, you know that. I mean, 100 Anthra lobby greeters? Triple digits. Do you feel good about yourself? These things are about as dangerous as a 92-year-old pensioner picking up a few extra shifts at Walmart because they can't afford their nursing home care. Sure, they pose a threat to new delvers, but to someone like you? Slaughtering lobby greeters is like shooting fish in a barrel. Using a .50 caliber machine gun. You monster. Reward, 5x Copper Delver Loot Token, 1x Silver Slayer Token. Title, Fish in a Barrel. You exude an aura of pure carnage. Dwellers more than 10 levels below you will actively avoid you, and slaying any dweller below level 5 grants no experience. This is an evolving title. This title cannot be unequipped. Sucks to be you. Honestly, this is what you get for being a dick and upsetting the delicate ecosystem of the lobby. The title seemed to do its job because, after that, the greeters disappeared like fog burning away with the noontime sun. That made the job easier in some ways, but also much less lucrative. And about 1,000 times more monotonous. In the end, though, that was fine, because it was high time I moved on to some of the other floors. Don't get me wrong. I wanted to do my part to help out all the poor suckers stuck in the lobby, but I also wanted to pick up relics, and brand new delvers weren't going to have many of those, if any. I needed to find some more seasoned backrooms veterans, and the only way to do that was to go deeper. With Unerring Arrow to guide us, Croc and I headed for the first floor. Chapter 31. The next 2 weeks pass much the same as those first 3 days in the lobby had. Croc and I spent every waking moment grinding through new quadrants and killing anything unlucky enough to get in our way. That, or hauling ass away from anything that was too powerful to tangle with head-on. I spent a lot more time running than I'd like to admit. The whole while, I mapped out different sectors, spray-painted warnings and survival tips, and distributed red twinning rings like Johnny fucking Appleseed sowing seeds through the rolling hills of Kentuckiana. We still spent a handful of hours every day up in the lobby. I'd begun to think of that as charity work, but the majority of our time was spent canvassing the first, second, and third floors. Of the 3 proper floors, the first was the least awful. I mean, it was still a miserable, existential nightmare of unending horror, filled with monstrous dwellers who would kill you as soon as look at you, but at least there were also resources and a few redeeming qualities. The first floor took the form of an enormous dystopian parking garage from hell, the kind of thing you might expect to find in a post-apocalyptic zombie flick. Unlike the lobby, which seemed to be a flat, continuous plane, floor 1 was an enormous cube with quadrants stacked one on top of the other, all held together by gargantuan concrete pillars, each the size of a skyscraper, which supported the level above. The garage wasn't empty. Its tens of thousands of spaces were occupied by a wide variety of vintage cars, which had been new and shiny once upon a time, but were now rusted and worn with age and disuse. Most of them didn't have keys, and even the ones that did rarely started. These things had been sitting for God only knew how long, and whatever magic animated the generators and lights on the floor didn't seem to extend to the vehicles themselves. There were a few exceptions, though. On the third day of exploration, my spelunker's sixth sense illuminated a bright orange, 1972 Ford Pinto that miraculously sputtered to life and was powered not by gasoline but by relic shards, of all things. Turned out, the ugly piece of shit was a bona fide artifact. A powerful one, too. Not only could I feed it shards to keep the motor running indefinitely, but it was a summonable item. Single quote 72 Ford Pinto of the hobo. Uncommon artifact. Type, summonable. Cost, 7 miles/1x common relic shard. You're down on your luck, in between jobs while trying to land your big acting break, and just got evicted from your studio apartment. No. And no, that's not a garbage bag, that's a suitcase. But at least you have this 1972 Ford Pinto that you inherited from your dead uncle, Bill. It's technically better than being homeless. Yes, it does smell like pee, and sure there's probably a possum roosting in the engine, but at least it keeps the rain off your back. To summon the artifact, simply repeat the words Bill uttered every Saturday night during the blistering hot summer of single quote 81, it's cruising time. To unsummon the artifact, repeat the words Bill would recite come Monday morning, why does God hate me? When unsummoned, the Pinto magically transformed into a miniature Hot Wheels made from real die-cast metal, which I could carry around in my pocket. It had a nice feel to it, but weighed no more than a typical Hot Wheels car would. The way the artifact defied the laws of both God and the conservation of mass was a real head-scratcher, but who was I to question the strange physics of this place? I had no idea if 7 miles to a shard was good, though I suspected not, and the Pinto had a host of other issues besides. 18 miles per hour was her top speed, no matter what I did, and the car radio blared The Girl from Ipanema on a continuous loop so long as the motor was running. The woofers were blown, and the radio could not be shut off or even turned down. It was less than an ideal situation, and after a few hours, I was fantasizing about sticking a screwdriver into both my ears to silence Asteroid Gilberto's gentle crooning. Still, despite its many faults, the Pinto was convenient and helped us cover a lot of ground much quicker than we could have on foot. And if there was one artifact like this, it stood to reason that there were likely others. Hopefully ones that were less old, went faster, and had a better selection of tunes. The first floor was also substantially safer than either the lobby or the sprawling mall that occupied the third floor. But safer still wasn't safe. There were mimics by the bushel, often assuming the form of cars, vending machines, and progenitor monoliths, which came as no shock to anyone. The monoliths still resembled ATMs and were all universally positioned outside of locked parking attendant shacks, which were tiny compared to the huge banks of the third floor. The shacks themselves were secured tighter than a nun's panties, and try as I might, there was no getting inside. There were the standard pitfalls to consider, but there were also a variety of floor-specific traps, which were as clever as they were deadly. Oil slicks that would spontaneously erupt into flames. Electrical hazards and carbon monoxide poisoning. Randomly placed car bombs, which gave me traumatic flashbacks to my days of running convoys outside of Fallujah. And dwellers, of course. Always dwellers. Although the mimics were the most plentiful, there were also roving bands of faceless humanoids. And when I say faceless, I mean faceless. They looked more or less like normal, everyday folk, but where eyes and noses and mouths should have been was just a smooth expanse of empty skin, stretched too tight against the skull. They couldn't see, but those cockwombles could hear a pin drop at 100 yards, and they ran like Olympian sprinters. The majority of the faceless were between level 4 and 7 and offered anywhere between 125 and 200 experience a pop, which wasn't bad at all, although I didn't get anything for killing the level 4s, thanks to my shitty no fish in a barrel title. Even barring the experience, they all carried at least one relic or the occasional artifact, though nothing that rivaled the glory of the Pinto. Their relics tended to be physical in nature and usually involved enhancing the senses in some way, often increasing sound or smell sensitivity. One even granted infrared vision, allowing the user to see like a pit viper. But those relics were a double-edged sword with distressing implications. The most common drop was called Mask of the Faceless. It took the form of a blank porcelain mask, devoid of eye or mouth holes, which increased sound and smell sensitivity by 10% each day the relic was equipped, while simultaneously decreasing eyesight by 10% each day in exchange. And if you kept the relic equipped long enough, you ended up like one of the faceless freaks aimlessly wandering the purgatory parking garage. Which meant that although the faceless weren't human any longer, most of them probably had been at one point. That was a thought I didn't dwell on for too long. I did score a kick-ass movement-enhancing relic from a level 9 ruined faceless, called Moving Walkway, which was a hell of a find with no nightmarish side effects. Moving Walkway. Common relic, level 1. Range, single target. Cost, 8 stamina. Buckle up, Buttercup, because it's time to take a ride on the wild side. Transform the ground directly beneath your feet into a moving walkway, allowing you to dash forward at 3 times your normal rate of speed for 6 seconds. Just be careful, because exiting the walkway can be a real sumbitch. Much as I hated to see it go, I swapped out the Gremlin's Growing Guardian for the makeshift haste ability, since being able to close the distance with my enemies or outrun high-threat pursuers was way more useful than a magical jockstrap, which also reduced my magic and elemental resistance. Although the first floor wasn't a place I wanted to spend much time, it wasn't terrible, either. Not compared to everything else in the back rooms, at any rate. Then there was the second floor. Asterisk. I'd come to hatefully think of the second floor as the devil's asshole because it was moist, gross, filled with suffering, and overflowing with shit. Suffice it to say, the second floor was 1,000 times worse than the first and made the lobby look bright, cheerful, and inviting by comparison. The entire level was composed of narrow service tunnels, built from water-slick red brick, crammed full of rusty pipes in 100 different sizes and varieties. Pipes that carried water. Others overflowing with fetid sewage. More still filled to bursting with steam. The cramped corridors were sweltering. It was like being stuck in a steam room located on the surface of the sun. Plus, the constant drip, drip, drip of water was maddening. Like a nail being pounded into your eardrums over and over again. The lights flickered constantly, often dying completely, casting the world into total, oppressive darkness, and the whole place smelled like the inside of a hot porta-john left to stew in the Iraqi desert for a few weeks. I often found myself trudging through ankle-deep sludge that reeked so bad that I had to wear a cloth face mask to help with the eye-watering stench. I muttered a small prayer of thanks that I decided not to use the smell-enhancing relic from the previous floor. On top of everything else, the place was dangerous, even more so than the third floor. Right hand to the good Lord, I couldn't toss a rock without hitting a trap. Intentionally faulty wiring constantly threatened to electrocute unlucky delvers at pretty much any given moment. Broken valves and cracked pipe junctures would jettison geysers of superheated steam, capable of melting flesh and muscle in a matter of seconds. Sewage pipes leaked streams of rancid, gag-inducing slurry that could poison you or afflict you with a prolonged sickness called sludge lung, which sounded exactly as bad as it was. I knew that firsthand because I caught sludge lung on my second day in the tunnels. I'd had to crawl back to the store in a feverish delirium to sleep off the effects of the sickness, which lasted the better part of a day. None of my elixirs helped either. I spent the entire time curled up in the fetal position, vacillating between a blazing fever and teeth-chattering chills, all while vomiting profusely and experiencing hallucinogenic nightmares. Without exaggerating, I can honestly say it was the sickest I'd ever been in my entire life. Thankfully, Croc and Baby Hands were there to nurse me back to health, while Princess Pony Puff cooed sweet nothings in my ear about the inherent weaknesses of mortal flesh and the imminent arrival of Vorgel, the devouring maw who dwells beneath. Good times. There were rooms on the second floor, as well, but they were all filled with roaring machinery and clanking gears, which Croc ominously referred to as limb rippers. The Mimic had lost 3 different delvers to the mechanical death engines of the second floor. Over several years, Croc had also lost 9 additional delvers to the unholy dwellers who called the floor home. There were enormous cockroaches, affectionately referred to as skitters, skin-melting slimes, literal shit golems, and elemental steamed djinn. The djinn were all level 10 or higher and completely immune to physical attacks. Needless to say, I spent the least amount of time on the second floor because, 1. Fuck that place and the shit horse it rode in on, and 2. I couldn't imagine anyone surviving there for more than a day or 2. It was an environmental train wreck, not fit for human habitation, and no one would spend any amount of time there of their own volition. I reluctantly planted a doorway anchor and left notes when and where I could, but I wasn't hopeful. At some point, I'd probably move the door to a floor with a little more foot traffic and less sewage. The only good thing was the experience and the loot. I actively avoided fighting the shit golems for obvious reasons. As for the skitters, slimes, and elementals, they were miserable sons of bitches who were hard to kill but gave out excellent experience for the trouble. Enough to push me up to level 15, though my progress stalled after that. So far, the progression system had been rather linear, and levels had come easily enough, but the points needed to advance from 15 to 16 were triple what had been required to move from 14 to 15. I got a decent stash of relics, which almost made the miserable floor worth it. Like the faceless of the first floor, the skitters had physical relics, which had to do with health regeneration or poison and disease resistance. They were decent and there were no overt drawbacks, so I decided to keep one of each for later. Most of the slimes carried a common relic called mucous membrane. It was a passive ore that caused the user's skin to secrete a goo-like acid, which dealt a small amount of corrosive damage in retaliation against all direct physical attacks. It synergized well with Bleach Blaze, but after a quick examination, I realized combining the two would transform my best offensive spell into a powerful defensive ability called Viscous Splash. It was a decent skill, but not at all what I needed, especially since I already had Sterilization Field. Still, it would be a great passive spell for any new Delver looking to round out their defensive lineup. I also managed to snag a single uncommon relic called Arcane Corrosion, from a level 7 Ancient Slime. It actively ate through an opponent's available mana reserve, draining 10 points of mana per minute for 5 minutes. The ability could also stack up to 5 times, and any additional stacks renewed the spell effect. It was good. Really good. And like Mucous Membrane, it also synergized with Bleach Blaze, though the overall effect was far better. Synergistic resonance detected. Would you like to forge Bleach Blaze Rare, Level 2 and Arcane Corrosion Uncommon, Level 1 into a new relic? Asterisk. Yes, no? Before committing, I ran a compatibility analysis. Researcher's Codex Compatibility Analysis. Based on historic datasets and extensive forging models, Bleach Blaze Rare, Level 2 and Arcane Corrosion Uncommon, Level 1 have an estimated 97% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is extremely low. The most probable outcome is Drano Bolt Rare, or a closely adjacent derivative. Would you like to view additional report records for the Drano Bolt ability? Yes, no? I viewed the additional report and was pleased with what I saw. Combining the two relics would not only increase Bleach Blaze's burst damage output, but it would add mana drain on top of the stamina drain it already dealt. With just a single ability, I'd be able to deal corrosive and fire damage while simultaneously obliterating a given target's stamina and mana pool. It was a dream spell, and I'd be an idiot not to forge the two items together, even though doing so dropped the new relic back down to level 1. I hit accept and added Drano Bolt into my spatial core with a satisfied grin. The second best find came from a level 12 steamjin, who was a maintenance chief, the second floor equivalent of store managers, who ran one of the largest machine shops we stumbled across. It was a rare great relic called Scalding Torrent. It resembled a foot-long hunk of pitted and rusty metal pipe. Its shitty exterior belied its true, badass nature, however. The relic jettisoned a concentrated burst of scalding steam, which inflicted significant burn damage and ignored traditional flame resistances since it was a water-based attack. It filled the same general role as my new and improved Drano Bolt, but didn't deal nearly as much burst or dot, plus no stamina or mana draining effect. Adding it to my lineup didn't make sense at this point, but I tucked it away from my personal collection. My gut told me I'd find a use for it sooner or later. When I wasn't grinding through the first 3 floors and spreading helpful survival tips far and wide, I spent my downtime crafting new relics using the shards I'd amassed. At first, I'd been reluctant to use them, thinking they'd be great for bartering, but at this point, it felt like I had an obscene number of the things. Not enough to Scrooge McDuck backstroke through, but I was getting there. Even though killing creatures under level 5 granted no experience, they still dropped lootable items, and every single one of them had shards. Croc talked me through the crafting process, which was strikingly similar to the ritual required to level up individual relics. First, I arranged the shards into 2 concentric rings. The outer ring was approximately 5 feet in diameter and consisted of a ring with 5 evenly placed shards. The inner ring was 3 feet in diameter and had 4 shards. I stood directly in the center of the pattern, clutching the final shard in one hand. That shard acted as the focal point for the ritual and would absorb the latent generative power of the other shards, eventually giving birth to a new relic. What type of relic formed seemed like a coin toss to me, though Croc insisted I could actively influence the creation process through a focused intention. Croc's explanation for how exactly I was supposed to do that was lacking was the kindest word I could think of. Just want what you want, Dan, the mimic said confidently as if that advice made a single lick of sense. Just picture it in your head and force your intention into the shard. Let your will radiate outward. Are you even listening to yourself? I asked the dog. Because that sounds like the biggest load of magical, pseudo-spiritual horseshit I've ever heard in my life. It sounds like the kind of thing a prosperity cult would teach. That or Gwyneth Paltrow. Just visualize what you want, I said, trying to emulate the dog's accent, and the universe will give it to you. Still, as dumb as the mimic's advice sounded, I tried anyway. I attempted to keep things simple and easy my first time out of the gate. The most common relic I'd seen so far was some iteration of the basic Kamo relic, which all of the mimics seemed to hold within their core. I closed my eyes and pictured the Kamo kit in my mind until it felt so real that I could almost reach out and touch it. I could see the stupid little mirror and the multicolored smudges of green, black, and brown grease paint. With the image fixed firmly in my mind's eye, I ever so slowly fed a trickle of mana into the shard in my hand. The shards arrayed around me resonated with a high-pitched whine that made my teeth itch. A moment later heat bloomed in my palm and the shard vanished, replaced by an item that weighed a lot more than it should have. I cracked an eye and glanced down, disappointed to find that instead of crafting a replica of the Kamo kit, I'd somehow created a dull black boot, which was so worn it looked like the sole would fall off at any moment. It was a common relic called Squeaky Sole and its stats were even worse than the boot looked. Instead of allowing its user to blend into the background, it created an ongoing passive effect that made the user's shoes squeak whenever they moved. It was by far the worst relic I'd seen so far. My second attempt didn't go any better, either. Neither did my third attempt. Or my fourth. Or my fifth or sixth or 10th. I created relics that summoned non-combatant pigeons that fluttered around and shit on you when you were least expecting it. Phantom Pocket teleported a random item from your storage space to an unknown location once a day. Another, called Dietary Restriction, caused a non-lethal, but highly uncomfortable allergic reaction whenever consuming an elixir of any type. It seemed like the harder I tried to craft something useful, the more awful the relics ended up. They were so bad I couldn't even forge them to make slightly less terrible relics. I ended up sacrificing the whole lot of them for levels. I focused my efforts on the newly enhanced Drano Bolt, finally pushing it up to level 5, which cost 20 low-grade common relics. I was a little surprised to see that the mana cost actually tripled, increasing from 5 to 15, but the damage scaled along with it. The spell now dealt 25 points of corrosive burst damage and a combined 20 points of corrosive and fire damage per minute for 5 minutes. Plus, both the stamina and mana drain had doubled from 10 to 20 points per minute. The spell was a magical wrecking ball, and only getting better and better all the time. Best of all, the level 5 advancement added an additional effect called Split Cast, which allowed me to split the attack into 2 streams, capable of targeting 2 different enemies simultaneously. Split Cast cut the total damage for each portion of the spell in half, but it added an additional level of versatility to the relic, especially when dealing with a group of lower-level mobs. A single Drano Bolt would likely be overkill in many cases, so the new effect would let me get twice the bang for my buck. I sacrificed another 10 relics to bring Sterilization Field up to level 3, increasing the effect duration by 5 seconds, then burned the last 5 I could spare to nudge the Pharmacist's scales up to level 2, which didn't seem to make any appreciable difference. But it was the only healing spell I'd come across so far, despite being a common relic, which told me I needed to work on upgrading it. Overall, it was a long and tedious couple of weeks, but the important thing was that my plan was working. By day 5 we got our first customer. Tobe continued.